I recently saw a presentation at Abundance 360, and Peter Diamandis, who's super focused on longevity, on finding the best ways that we can all live for as long as possible. He described sugar as a poison, which we need to eliminate as much as is physically possible. Now, eliminating sugar is not a super easy thing. I appreciate that, but it is something that we need to reduce or control if we want to be as healthy as possible. And so that's what I want to cover today in this kind of whistle stop learning lunch. But I just want you to kind of hear those words at the start, that sugar is considered a poison by one of the people that speaks to as many, the top health experts and top longevity experts on the planet. The problem is, of course, it is also everywhere. It's really difficult. Elimination is pretty much impossible. So it's about then finding strategies with which we can reduce and control that sugar that we're exposed to. Now, one of the books that I'm going to refer to on and off, it's one of the books that probably provided the most content for this presentation, was a book called this is Jessie Inchauspé, which is really difficult to say. But she's written two books, The Glucose Goddess. Actually, The Glucose Revolution is the one that I kind of taken more from. But I just thought it was worth starting with her story. So her story is that she ended up at 19. She was in Hawaii with some friends. She jumped off a waterfall, damaged her back, had loads and loads of, she literally basically broke her back, and had loads of health problems thereafter, which kind of caused a multitude of different issues with her, not so much physically, but as much mentally as physically. Lots of mental health issues. And she was working around the science of nutrition at the time, and she was wearing a glucose monitor, which I'll come on to later on. But she specifically noticed that all of the mental health issues got way worse when the glucose monitor picked up on the fact that she had had a blood sugar spike. That is what led to 4 years of really deep research on the sugar, and ultimately led to why she wrote The Glucose Revolution, which is the book that I'll refer to a few times. But it's really interesting how the sugar is definitely having a way bigger impact on us and society than we probably give it credit for. Because ultimately, sugar exists in nature. We get it from fruit, but we get it from lots and lots of different sources. But historically, sugar in nature was far less prevalent than it is today. So, for example, even if we just take the fruit that we eat today, if we looked at that exact same fruit 200 years ago, it would have been a lot less sweet and it would have had a lot more fiber. So actually, even just eating fruit, so because we've got basically millennia of breeding fruit to be sweeter, then even sort of natural whole fruits are worse for us than they would have been historically. But of course, what we then do is we extract the sugar out of the fruit or whatever. We concentrate it, and that makes it even worse. And then we put it in liquid form and we drink it. And if you look across nature, there's pretty much no examples of liquid sugar in nature. So the fact that we can now drink a can of Coke or whatever, or even just orange juice, it just doesn't really exist in nature. So our bodies are just not designed to deal with it. So what we really want to think about is the impact that sugar has on our blood glucose levels. And essentially, so what Jessie described it as the glucose roller coaster. But the problem that we have when we consume sugar is we get this big spike in blood sugar, and then that leads to a big crash in blood sugar. And that is where the problems arise. So what are the problems with that particular with that particular glucose roller coaster? Well, firstly, we end up with the insulin resistance. So basically, regular sugar spikes require the pancreas to release more insulin, which over time can lead to insulin resistance, which leads to diabetes. It can lead to energy crashes. So after a spike, the blood sugar levels can plummet, leading to the feelings of fatigue or lethargy. So, for example, you eat a big sandwich over lunch at lunchtime, and then in the afternoon, you're like, oh, I could really do with a nap. So energy crashes are classic. That often then leads to hunger and cravings. Anyone ever notice when you have a big carb-heavy lunch that actually you feel really hungry by sort of 4 or 5 o'clock? Whereas if you'd eaten a lighter salad, much less food, but actually you don't feel hungry till 7 or 8 o'clock. That sharp rises and falls in blood sugar can increase the feelings of hunger and lead to overeating. It leads to mood fluctuation. So sugar spikes can cause mood swings, irritability, and even depression, as Jessie saw herself. And then there's a whole load of long-term health risks, which I shall come on to in a minute. And part of the problem with sugar is it's very easy to become addicted to it, because when we get sugar, our body releases dopamine, and that is why we become addicted to it. Essentially, the body's going, oh, this is lovely, I like this. Dopamine is triggered, and that's why we become addicted to it. So what are the symptoms of having too much sugar? Well, firstly, there's the cravings of sugar. So if you're craving sugar at some points, then potentially you're already having too much. Fatigue is a symptom of too much sugar. Brain fog is a symptom of too much sugar. And in fact, a long-term side effect of that is that there's a strong link between high sugar consumption and Alzheimer's. Actually, some people even refer to Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes. So it can really impair our brain's health. Too much sugar can impact the quality of our sleep. We know from a previous learning lunch how important it is that we get good sleep. It can make menopause symptoms worse. It can cause hormone imbalances. All of our body symptoms get better with better glucose levels. So if we, I'll come on to inflammation. I'll mention inflammation now, actually. But it is shown that pretty much, so 3 out of 5 people die from a disease that is related to inflammation. And higher sugar consumption is shown to trigger inflammation in the body. It's also shown that we age faster the more glucose spikes or blood sugar spikes that we create. And this is through a process called glycation. So essentially, the more of those glucose spikes we get, the faster we age and the more unhealthy we become. And that inflammation that is triggered by having too much sugar leads to things like type 2 diabetes. It leads to cancer, and it leads to heart disease. So, for example, high sugar intake has been correlated with increased risk of heart disease, attributed specifically to inflammation, high triglyceride levels, and other heart disease risk factors. And of course, one of the things that I remember being taught that, if you eat, leave the rind off your bacon, don't have butter because fat will make you fat. Ironically, actually, that is really not that true. So fat actually we don't tend to store fat as a result of eating fat. We tend to store way more fat when we eat sugar. And so essentially, that is why sugar is creating the biggest obesity problems across society. And the reason we know so much more about this now is because we've got this combination of blood glucose monitors and technology. So it's actually now really easy to track this. Now, so in the triathlon world, we have a thing called Super Sapiens, where glucose monitor on, and you can see when you need a gel, whether a gel is better for you than a bar, which brand of gel works for you better, all of that sort of stuff. We're getting way more scientific about it. But you've probably seen the business created by Tim Spector, which is called Zoe. So Carol, I'm on the waiting list to Zoe. Carol has been through it and done it. And the amount of detail that she got in terms of, well, this food causes this type of blood sugar spike. And now I know that these meals will be good for me and these meals will be bad for me based on what triggers my blood glucose levels. That's why we've now got a far better picture of what's going on with sugar. So what causes our blood glucose to spike? Well, really, it's two things. It's starchy foods, so your breads, your pastas, your rices, and it's sweet foods. So those two things are pretty much everything that causes your blood sugar to spike. And what I found really interesting is that if we want to do this well, then it's not about so much eliminating sugar, it's about minimizing and controlling it, because it is, it really is in so many different things. And in the glucose, sorry, I've put the wrong one of her books up here actually, but in the glucose goddesses, in the glucose revolution, she talks about 10 hacks to flatten the glucose curve. And I love these hacks because I think these are really, so she's very adamant that she loves sugar like the rest of us. She wants to be able to eat sugar, but she knows that she needs to keep that glucose curve flat to avoid having health issues, whether it's mental health or anything else. So these 10 hacks, I just really think that they're as good an example as I've seen of how we can kind of take actionable steps to minimize the impact of sugar while still eating, the way that we want to eat, essentially. And so the first one of these hacks is to eat food in the right order. So, and if you think about how like a lot of societies historically eat, for example, Japanese food, you have edamame beans at the start of a meal before you eat any carbs. It's what we eat, the order of which we eat our food is really important and makes a massive difference. So in other words, what we can see here is if we look at this chart, we can see the glucose spike going into the red after a slice of pizza. But if we have a green salad and then the slice of pizza, the glucose spike gets nowhere near close to the level that it does with just having the pizza. So the reason that this is important is if we eat fiber or veggies first, then proteins and fats, and then carbs or sugar, we can have exactly the same meal as we would have eaten beforehand, but with less spike. So, and ultimately, I know what you're thinking. If I'm going to have pizza, I can't sit there and pick all the veggies off the bloody thing, then pick the cheese off the thing, and then only eat the base. But actually, the salad beforehand is a great example of how you could have. And actually, I started adopting this in the US because when I was in the US with, I mentioned you, Ken. I was there with David Batchelor, and we were going out we went out to a jazz club, and we basically concluded that actually, particularly in the US, because they're really rubbish at giving you vegetables with main meals, always have a salad as your starter because it's the way of getting the veggies in first. But it's also, it ties really well into this in that you get your fiber and your veggies in before you have your proteins, and then more importantly, before you have your carbs, because it flattens this glucose curve. And so one of the best ways, so you literally can sit there. So sometimes I will, if I've got a big bowl of pasta in front of me, I'll go, right, okay, the first few mouthfuls are just going to be the veg, and then I'll start eating the pasta. So there's a way you can do it that way, or you can add this starter first. Another way you could do that, this is a bad example of an image because I've picked a salad that has actually got bread in it. So what you would want to do, and actually one of the examples that she uses a lot is the fact that, when we typically go to a restaurant, what do? They give you bread to start with. And I love bread. So, good, nice, warm bread with some proper decent butter. But what that does is the bread is causing us way more problems than we realize. So by starting a meal with bread on an empty stomach, what that basically means is that glucose goes straight into the blood, and we get a much quicker glucose spike. Not only that, but by eating that bread at the start of the meal, the restaurant is doing, it's a great idea from the restaurant's point of view, because what it's likely to mean is you're going to eat more. By eating that bread at the start of the meal, you're going to eat more at the restaurant than if you eat the salad first. So just by deferring the bread until after you've had your salad starter will flatten your glucose curve, and also mean that you're inclined to eat less over the course of that meal. And that's because essentially what happens is the fiber lines the stomach, and as a result, that glucose enters the bloodstream more slowly, so you don't get that spike. So like I said, this is something that the world has understood for a while, in that Japanese will give you edamame beans. In France, you'll get crude d'état type. What do you call it? I can't remember. Whatever, little carroty things. And in Italy, you'd have your antipasti. So when you eat your veggies first, the fiber in them ensures that the foods consumed afterwards travel slowly through the digestive tract, and therefore the glucose enters the blood less in less of a rush, which will give you a smaller curve. One of the other things she says is stop counting calories. One of the 10 hacks is that counting calories is just a completely pointless exercise. She said, great analogy actually. She said it's like judging a book by the number of pages it has. So the number of calories on your or in a meal is completely different. If you have a meal that has like high fructose, then that is worse than glucose, or worse than the same amount of calories in protein, or the same amount of calories in fat. So counting calories is completely pointless. And not only that, that different types of calories impact different people in different ways. So forget counting calories. And essentially, if you eat healthily, you can basically eat as much food as you like. Another hack is to flatten the breakfast curve. So cereal is obviously a popular breakfast, but ultimately ends up being high in sugar, and it will create that big glucose spike. So the recommendation is to go savory for breakfast as much as possible. So whether that's wilted spinach, whether that's mushrooms, whether that's eggs, whether that's you can actually have a piece of toast with that. She says, having a piece of toast with savory stuff is actually is not so bad. And in fact, she mentions in the book that adding butter to that toast will again flatten the impact of the bread on your glucose, on your blood glucose. What she also talks about, not so much in the book, but on a podcast I was listening to on Diary CEO, interviewing her, is she talks about having a protein shake at the start of the day, saying that's actually a really good way of doing it. If you want to add some fruit to kind of give it more flavor, then berries are the best thing to have. Berries are high in fiber and lower in sugar. So if you are going to add fruit to a protein shake or a smoothie, then berries are the best way forward. And again, at breakfast, in terms of flattening that breakfast curve, no fruit juice. Fruit juice is just really bad for you. Essentially, natural sugar is the same molecule as any other sugar. So you wouldn't drink a glass of Coke for breakfast, I'm assuming, and essentially drinking a glass of orange juice is exactly the same. And then she kind of like talks about how all sugar is the same. I always had this impression that fruit was kind of like natural sugar, so that was okay, whereas having a sugary kind of processed food was much worse. Actually said it's just the same. You've got to treat it just the same. So again, the worst fruits would be things like your mangoes and your bananas and your tropical fruits, because they're much higher in sugar, whereas your kind of particularly older varieties of apples or berries tend to be less sugar intensive. Another hack is, if you're going to have something sweet, have it as a dessert rather than as a snack. So if you're going to eat something sweet, have it after your meal. So think about fitting it into that food process order. So have it straight after your lunch. Two reasons, really. One is you're probably going to eat less of it anyway by eating it after you've eaten your main lunch or main dinner. But again, the glucose spike will be much less if you eat this sweet thing after the other meal, as opposed to as a snack in between meals. So that's another hack. One hack that I have to admit I haven't really played around with, but I made a point of thinking that I will do. But Carol has done this on and off for a little while, actually, having read the book and listened to the podcast, and that is to reach for vinegar before you eat. So you can reduce your blood sugar by 30% and your insulin spike by 20% by literally adding a bit of vinegar. So around about a tablespoon of vinegar in water. Apple cider vinegar is best, or as a salad dressing, and that will significantly flatten your glucose curve. And basically it slows the arrival of the glucose into the bloodstream and increases the speed at which the muscles soak it up. And that's because of it's to do with the acetic acid. It slows down how quickly it gets into the bloodstream, but also it basically tells, it's like this early warning system to say to the muscles, there's sugar coming, please get ready to absorb it, and so less of it goes into the bloodstream. Another hack is, after you've eaten, move. So whether that's going for a 10-minute walk, or one of the other things she talks about is just doing calf raises. I obviously have a standing desk here. I'll be doing some calf raises after my lunch. The reason calf raises work really, really well is I can't remember the science behind it, but the calves are very big muscles and very good at soaking up those glucose. So walking or calf raises, again, do it after the meal, and you'll flatten the glucose curve. Another hack she talks about is to go savory when it comes to snacks. Rather than having sweet things, try and have some nuts or something like that. Again, it will mean that you get much better, more sustained energy. I mean, don't eat like the whole bowl of nuts. I mean, like you're seeing in front of us. But if you eat some nuts, you will end up with really good sustained energy, but you won't have that blood sugar crash. Now, here's one that I've really kind of warmed to, although I don't really tend to eat loads of sweet things anyway. But she describes the final hack as put some clothes on your carbs. So by eating carbs alone, our glucose levels will play havoc with the hunger hormones. But if you when you're choosing carbs, if you make the habit of adding some fiber, protein, or fat, and if possible, eat it first, but if not, add it to the dish. So, for example, if you wanted some toast, having an avocado on toast, or even adding butter to that, or peanut butter, or any nut butter, then that will flatten the curve. Also, she talks about having, if you wanted to have a piece of chocolate cake, having some yogurt or some creme fraiche with that will, again, flatten that glucose curve and have less impact. And ultimately, therefore, improve your long-term health, mean that you're aging less. Now, one thing I'm slightly disappointed that Claire's not on this one, just because I wanted to create a debate with Claire about this, in that Claire, being a nutritionist, I know that she drinks quite a bit of Diet Coke. The thing to fix the problem is not to go, right, okay, I'm going to have less sugar, I'm just going to drink lots of Diet Coke instead. So my understanding from reading around this subject quite a bit is that when you have the artificial sweeteners, they can have as bad an impact on your health as the normal sugar that it's trying to replace. And the reason it can do that is it has an impact on the insulin and blood sugar. So basically, studies have found that certain artificial sweeteners can cause an insulin response, even though the sugar then never arrives. And actually, that basically ends up creating an insulin resistance over time, which is the precursor to type 2 diabetes. Basically what you're doing is you're telling your brain, you're telling your system that sugar's coming, it never arrives, but the insulin is released because it thinks it's arriving. The gut microbiota changes over time. So research around this shows that some artificial sweeteners can change the composition and function of our gut bacteria, and this potentially has quite a lot of impact, but particularly impaired blood sugar control. By having artificial sweeteners, we're also we get an increased sweetness preference. So essentially we're saying we still like drinking sweet drinks, and therefore when later on, when maybe a Diet Coke isn't available, you'll tend to go for another sweet drink over, say, drinking water. There's also a psychological aspect to this, which is around compensatory eating. So people often think that because they're consuming sugar-free products, they can actually afford to indulge in other areas. But actually, that just is a vicious circle. Impact on glucose absorption. So some studies suggest that artificial sweeteners might change the way that the body processes sugar. For instance, these sweeteners could increase glucose absorption in the intestine, leading to higher post-meal blood sugar levels. And then they can also cause pancreatic stress. So don't reach for the Diet Coke if, as an alternative, just stay away from anything that's a sugary drink in particular. If you want to read more around this subject, the books that I particularly found very, there's loads of books in this area. The best book I have found is definitely Jessie Inchauspé's book, The Glucose Revolution. And if you listen to her interview on Diary of a CEO, you'll get a really great rounded understanding of this particular topic. Tim Spector's Food for Life is also, I'm only about halfway through that at the moment, but it is a brilliantly detailed book on what food is good and what food is bad, and each different food category. And then in terms of just staying healthy and longevity, there's loads of brilliant books I've recommended previously on longevity, whether it's Lifespan by Dr. David Sinclair or Superhuman by Dave Asprey. But the one that probably covers the most diversity is Life Force by Tony Robbins and Peter Diamandis. So I would check that out. But I, in particular, I would, even if you just do one thing, I would listen to either The Glucose Revolution or Jessie Inchauspé on Diary of a CEO, and it'll just give you some brilliant tools as to how you can flatten the glucose curve and understand why it's important that you do that. So what I wanted to do is, I'm not going to give you time to do this now, but I've put together the sugar sacrifice, which is just an exercise for you to go through after we finish today, and just think, well, okay, what could I do? Now, it might be that, why do I need to reduce sugar is just, for me, it was just about living longer and living healthier. But, some of the answers to these questions might be very specific in terms of specific to a particular meal. Some might be, it might be to read this particular book, whatever it is, whatever it does that, means that works for you. But I'd just like you to just spend a bit of time after this learning lunch, just going through that. And if you can just take one action repeatedly on the basis of what we've talked about today, then that's a great step in the right direction. And of course, I've talked in the habit compound, I talked about the habit tracker. It might be once you come to a decision around, maybe, for example, let's have a starter or a vegetable starter or salad starter before we eat our main meal at home. And, just to make that interesting, you probably add a bit of balsamic vinegar, or even better, apple cider vinegar, and some olive oil. So really simple, but a really great way of getting that fiber in before you come on to the main event. Whatever it is, I hope you just take away one or two things that you can use to improve your health. If you want to reduce weight, then this is an amazing way to do it. Probably the best way you can set about it. And what I found over time is, and because I eliminated sugar, or not eliminated, but massively reduced it a few years ago, what I found is that you very quickly, you stop, that craving disappears. It will have that crave. If you eat a lot of sugar at the moment, you will find that craving is there to start with. That's your gut bacteria basically saying we're addicted to sugar, and the body is addicted to that dopamine hit. It doesn't take long to train it not to be. So I really encourage you to go through that, and hopefully you'll come up with some good ideas. Before I leave you, and before we kind of just discuss anything around that, I just wanted to share with you an event that we're launching in February, which is called the Entrepreneur's Edge Intensive. It's essentially a catch up on everything that we've done in the trusted team over the course of the last 12 months. It's a 3-day event. And it's like a workshop, but 3 days of workshops all roll into one. So it's total immersion. And for those of you that haven't done that whole year, it's a great way of playing catch up on all of that. So it's obviously about growing. It's same as the Trusted Team workshops. It's about growing your business, improving your work-life balance, but also bringing the fun back into business. We're holding it at a really lovely hotel in the Midlands, not so far from here. And we're going to include some fine dining within that. So it's more tax deductible fun, which is what we like. We're going to have one of those evenings. We're going to make it a proper storytelling evening as well. So I want you to kind of refine and improve your stories around that you tell around the business, and we can do that in a really lovely social setting. And essentially, it's a 3-day event which is led by me. A few of the things that we will go through are obviously we went through the phenomenal process and how we can use that in our business to explain what we do more. We'll go through we'll go through that. We'll go through the whole goal setting piece. So it's a great way of us doing starting the year out by creating some amazing goals and working out how we go backwards from that to actually ensure we achieve them. And for that, I'll take you through a process which is the Tony Robbins process that I've described previously as being the most powerful goal setting process I've ever been through. I will go back through the AI Advanced, but it will be the updated version. So we'll go through again what we can do with how we can use AI. We'll redo the productivity focuser, which is how you can kind of get more out of your time, delegate things like your inbox, all of that sort of stuff. We'll go through something that we rushed in the workshop because we were running out of time that day, the age reversal revolution. So very much plays into what we are talking about today. We'll go through again the one-page business plan and refine what we've got on there. We'll go through the why beneath, which I don't think maybe only Nitesh did in the first workshop, but I don't know that anybody else did that. I'm going to get you to spend a bit more time on that limitless life planner. I don't know how much you guys are using it, but I really want you to kind of build up and use that every day if we can get you doing that. Habits compound, I mentioned that just briefly earlier on. We'll do that again. We'll get you building your expert positioning story and your story playbook, and understand how you can use that in your marketing to market you as the expert. And we'll build out the referral revolution, which is obviously how we can, I can't remember, other than I know Nitesh would have done the referral revolution, but I'm not sure whether anyone else would have done that. We'll do the successful business scorecard again, and we'll do the Colby concept. So if you want to do that, it's 3 days. It's at the start of February. I know Charlotte can share you the dates. I forgot to look them up beforehand. But it will be a brilliant opportunity to kind of totally immerse yourself in that. The cost of that is, for anybody else, is £1,997. But as you guys are already trusted team members, we'll give you 50% off that. So just under £1,000 to come and do a 3-day event. Obviously, you've got to pay for your own accommodation, but it'd be great to get you guys at that if you would like to do that. And then finally, the next workshop is the 20th of November. I'm hoping you've all got it in your diary. I've lined up an awesome speaker for us, a guy called Scott Kolosky. I know I mentioned this to Nitesh. I know he's been listening to his podcast lately, which is The Digital Optimist. Scott, I saw Scott speak on Tony Robbins' stage 10 years ago. He's a futurist. The predictions he made around how we would use the smartphone as our outboard brain have been completely true and gone to a whole nother level. And he's going to be talking to us about an optimistic future around AI. So he's going to be awesome. On that note, if you've got anybody that you think might be interested in the trusted team, whether they want to attend in person, or I'm open to letting people dial in just to see Scott speak, but I'll do that virtually rather than, I don't really want people turning up just to see Scott speak. But if you would like to either invite a guest for free to come along to the whole workshop, or to get somebody to dial in and just see Scott speak as our guest speaker, then yeah, let us know. We'll happily invite them. Let Charlotte know, and we'll make sure that happens. So that is the learning lunch for today. Just out of curiosity, let's go back to the. I know you obviously haven't done it as yet, but what are your thoughts on the sugar sacrifice, and how, what did you learn from that, and how are you going to, is there any specific takeaways you've already got that you're going to implement?
So I've just read a book called Eat to Beat Disease by William W. Lee. A friend of mine, a good friend of mine's got stage 4 cancer, and he said that he wouldn't be here unless he changed his diet. So removing all sugars, eating more soya, berries, fish, has been game changing for him. So I say that, and me and Sarah had cinnamon buns for lunch. So we're not living by what we're reading. So, but the book was incredible in terms of looking at what you should eat, balance it out. It's about a 15-hour read or listen. So it's a long book.
Remind me what that book was called.
Eat to Beat Disease by William W. Lee. It's a really good book. So I've listened to it now, and it's a long read, but very good.
Brilliant.
And it breaks down kind of food into different key areas in your life in terms of it's called the 5x5x5 diet. Okay. Making sure that you can have like Granny Smith's apples followed by fish, or hake, I think is a fish they say, and then just balancing it. So you might have one meal which hits all 5, but actually you could break that down into separate meals during the day.
Awesome. Excellent. I've not heard of that book before, but I'll add that to my reading list. That sounds really good. Anything else? Anybody going to do anything differently already as a result of the sugar sacrifice?
Yeah.
Probably have less donuts, to be honest. Because
stay out of that bloody thing that's opened on the high street in Oakham.
Oh, Butterwick. Gotta love the Butterwick.
Do not go in there. It's evil.
Well, it is, because at the end of the day, they come out and go, hey, do you want a bag with 5 for a £5? When it's £3 a normal donut. And then suddenly the financial brain in me is going, hold on a second, that's 67% off. And it's full of sugary goodness. Yeah, it's Satan on a stick.
Isn't that how drug dealers work? Try a bit. Just try a bit.
Yeah, well, you know what? Sugar is evidently that. But no, an interesting point on this is that I come from a heritage where basically everyone in my family, as far as we know, has got diabetes. And so the chance of me having it is really, really high. And what's been interesting is that I've now realized that I've really got to start pulling back and change things, because otherwise I will pretty much be either on tablets or insulin shots within the next 5 years. So I've got to do it, but it is hard. It is hard, like anything.
Well, if you come back to thinking about, I've been thinking a lot about how we can install habits again briefly. So if you think about it, like the habit is the most important thing. Yeah. How much you do of it is, so you just got to think, well, okay, how can I just create a little habit that will become bigger over time, whether it's just eating the vegetables first when it's in front of you, and then you go, okay, well, if I'm going to do that, I might as well make myself a salad, or whether it's the exercise afterwards, even if it's like starts off with a 1-minute walk outside. And what you find is by the time you got outside, you're like, well, I'm now outside, bugger it, I might as well do the 10 minutes, might I? That's the way.
I think my biggest barrier at the moment, and being open and honest to everyone, is there's so many things. that I need to make a habit and change on, that I've decided that I'm not going to overwhelm myself by trying to do so much. I'm just going to choose one thing every week.
That's a good idea.
Just do that one thing. So, as we know, compound. But yeah, sugars, I think weeks 43, 2026.
Anybody else? Kenny, are you going to do anything differently to that? I know you do lots of exercise.
There's some really, really interesting points there, Charlie. Well, I've kind of found that most approaches are unsustainable. You know, that they're a very transitory thing. One thing that worked reasonably well, a couple of things I found, intermittent fasting, which everyone will be familiar with, was reasonably effective. But the one thing that kind of worked well for me was, I thought, if I make 2 better food choices a day, then cumulatively that's 14 a week. And that could mean, you know, if I'm having soup at lunchtime and there's 2 slices of bread, you have 1. Or at lunchtime, when you go through that torturous 15 minutes after a lunch, that you don't have a cake, or that there's just micro things, because that is sustainable. You can have a reasonably normal life. And what I kind of found was it led to, when it did get to the weekend, you made kind of better food choices. So it was just these sort of wee micro decisions. They were quite easy battles to win in your head. But over the course of a week, if you made 14 better food choices, then cumulatively I found that it actually had quite an effect, and it was A, sustainable, and B, it wasn't really that difficult to achieve. Other things are too deep and too profound, and it was just much, much harder to do over a period of time. But that was really, really interesting, you know, info, even the salads, you know, and how it affects. Because, I mean, everyone, we need to live. I mean, you know, something's going to get us in the end. And it was just very interesting, you know, even at the introduction of salads, you know, into, you know, how that affects things at a physiological level or whatever. And yeah, very, very interesting. I've taken the notes of the books, and I've actually, since I spoke to you, I've now read the 5 a.m. Club, The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, and I've just finished Everyday Hero. So I'm a child of Robin Sharma at the moment. And I've started just today the diaries of the CEO. So some great stuff in there. I think Robin Sharma's kind of written too many books about the kind of same thing. You know, you're getting to a point where you think, look, I get it.
Done with him.
I get it, but it was first class. A lot of great, and I like read, you know. So yeah, very good. Yeah, no, that was excellent. And
I think you raised one good point, which is worth mentioning. Is so I used to do, when I first started on this kind of healthy food journey, I concluded that I'd do healthy weeks and weekend treats. So 5 days a week, I would live by the mechanism of which, you know, trying to cut out or keep to a minimum gluten, alcohol, at the time caffeine. I've changed my mind on that one, and the research seems to suggest correctly. Sugar, something else, can't really remember what. And then at the weekend, it was like gloves off, do whatever you want. And to start with, when I tried that, it was like, right, on Friday night, I want pizza, I want red wine, on Saturday, I want burger, I want bread. And then actually, the longer I did it, the more that I noticed that actually Saturday lunchtime was becoming salads and omelets, and it wasn't, you ended up craving, you know, the good stuff just kind of gradually crept more and more into the time you're giving yourself permission to have the bad stuff anyway, because you knew you felt better for it, you enjoyed it more. So actually, you're absolutely right. You take those little compound steps and you end up doing exactly that. So it's a really good point. Thanks, people.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, in that case, let me know at the next workshop, let me know what you decided to do based on the sugar sacrifice, and how you're getting on, because I will ask. And then, but I ultimately, it's just a brilliant, I think, listen to that particular episode of Diary of a CEO, take some ideas away from how you can implement it in your life. And I have no doubt that it will make you healthier, happier, and more productive as well.